Platforming games have always been Nintendo's bread and butter since the 1980s. We all know the classic Mario and Donkey Kongs, but we also have Kirby, a very basic looking character design going on adventures to save Dreamland and shit. But unlike the other platformers like Mario and Donkey Kong, Kirby never really experimented. Although yes, you have games that took advantage of certain hardware's gimmicks and use it to its advantage, but besides from my understanding, Kirby 64, the games have always been a 2D side-scroller. This is for the mainline games, by the way. It's not really a bad thing, but it's really just limited in terms of what the designers can do. Not to mention that the target demographic is younger kids. To start Kirby's adventures on the Nintendo Switch, the current generation of hardware, was Kirby Star Allies. It was first revealed at Nintendo E3 showcase in 2017 without a title and was scheduled to release in 2018. And later on, it was given its final title and a scheduled release for March 15th of 2018. I pre-ordered the game January from my memory and ended up getting the game on release. This would have been my first Kirby game and I was happy with what I was given, and I remembered the soundtrack for the game being so good. And I would beat it in that weekend. Keep in mind that back then I didn't really care about backlogs at all, and beating games wasn't really common, so this was special. Other memories I have with this game include me and a friend talking about it in biology and how I would later go to Connecticut for a fun day on Sunday. And now it's February 2022. I remember wanting to revisit this game for a while, but I didn't have the time or other games came in the way. But now I believe is the perfect time for it because not only my backlog is getting smaller, unless I want to play Assassin's Creed Syndicate or play the other games I own but haven't beaten yet, but also we're getting a brand new Kirby game that is going to attempt to bring the series to a modern era. Personally, this new game looks like Super Mario Odyssey but with a Kirby skin. But back to Star Allies. Will this game be as good as I remember it from one of my favorite years of my life? Or is this an average platformer that brings nothing new to the table? This is the myth, the legend, Squidward 5, and this is my gaming essay on my replay of Kirby Star Allies. Let's discuss the plot and how it managed to give you a goal for this game. We see this wizard character destroying some heart crystal that would be scattered around the galaxy and end up in many pieces. Meta Knight calmed, King Dedede decided to watch JoJo, and Kirby was asleep because he had a 9-to-5 job and ended up awakening because of the pieces hit his head or some magic shit or some shit. He then notices that the Waddle Dees are bringing large amount of foods to Dedede because he's Nikocado Avocado. Kirby then went to fight King Dedede, which he ended up like a drugged up NFL player. Once he was beaten, the heart escaped the body and Kirby followed. He would then go to Planet Popstar to find out more. We then see Meta Knight because this is a Kirby game, and once beaten, a fortress appeared, and because this is a fictional story, we just had to go there. We would meet these three mage sisters. Their purpose is to get the heart to resurrect Dark God. After going through space and into these other worlds, we would land into this space station called Jambandera, and we would meet Terminus, who is the guy behind everything. He looks like I seriously left this blank for some reason. We will have a couple of battles with him and some large final bosses, that Dark God guy, that consists of a few phases and some final moments and ends. That's all. This is typical for a Kirby story, about saving the universe from mass destruction because we just had to. There could have been some character development that would have helped understand what's going on, but we don't see why Terminus is doing what he's doing or having any sort of care out there. But for me, it's there to give the player a goal, and not all games have to have a good story or develop characters. But for me, it's there to give the player a goal, and not all games have to have a good story or develop characters. The story itself is just fine. But why you want to play this game in particular is the gameplay. Let's move on to me taking a shower because it's gameplay time. Kirby has mostly been a 2D platformer franchise with a few wacky side games here and there. This game is no different from the rest of the Kirby series, and thus making a familiar game but a lack of major substance. Let me explain. You go start to finish in a basic 2D environment with basic obstacles, enemies, and some puzzles here and there. The main gimmick of this game is pressing X and you would throw hearts to enemies and they would become allies, like in the title, Kirby Star Allies. You can hold 3 at a time, and they can also be used as a power-up for Kirby. You would combine powers with 2 or more allies to make more powerful allies that can do more attacks. Most of the time these would be a weapon with elemental powers like fire, ice, water, wind, and electric. You would collect these puzzle pieces to make these portraits and they're for completionists, and find switches to unlock palaces in which you can have a cameo character be on your side. And they're just there for the sake of nostalgia or some shit, or celebrating the history of Kirby or some shit, I don't know. Yeah, I say shit often. The maps are open and you can do some basic walking around and getting some star tokens or whatever they're called, but that's it. And besides some basic flying and sucking up enemies, sex is not involved in this action, this is basically the game. The game's core design is extremely basic, which can be a good and bad thing. It's a good thing since for people who are new to the franchise and for young kids who are somewhat new to gaming, they might have a good time. But on the other hand, some may say it has little substance, and if you're not a fan of these ideas, then the game is not for you. For me, I think it works as a cool 2D game, but for Kirby standards, this is the bare minimum of what really a Kirby game is. Not saying it's a bad thing, but for those who really play the franchise, then it's basically the same experience you have seen unless you enjoy these type of stuff. The only real different thing in the actual main content would be a few phases in the final boss, in which you go in a 3D environment and use a space star thing to launch projectiles at it. You do also have some other stuff you could do after beating the game. Haven't checked them out in this playthrough, but I know there's a mode that has a hard survival mode and some time trial stuff. And you can also listen to the game's soundtrack, which is great since Nintendo hates people posting their music. Overall, the gameplay itself is just okay. It can have great moments and it can have average moments, but it usually depends on what you'll want out of a Kirby game, or want in general. This is the first mainline Kirby game to be in HD, and it looks nice and pleasant to look at. The environments look rich in color and detail that makes it look like a wonderful place to be, with saturated colors and the use of perspective to show the landscapes of the backgrounds. As for frame rate, it's said that the menus and the ending jump thing is 60 frames per second, while the actual game is 30. I'm not sure what happened in development, but I know that you need to be consistent with your frame rates for consistent action and experience. I'm writing this part days after I beat it. Finally, we have music, and there's so many great scores such as the title screen, the cavern theme, and much more. And when revisiting it, it was the part I was looking forward to the most, since it represents one weekend in March, and is something I looked fond of when I played it. Since I don't care for these segments, it's the best looking Kirby game and has one of the best scores in any game, as of February 2022. But consistency is something they should have worked on with the frame rate. For many people, this feels like a typical Kirby game, with many of the core elements in place and how it wants to play it safe. It's not wrong to play it safe for making a new game, but since you have more powerful hardware, you could do more than a basic 2D platformer. Plot-wise, it does its job, but it's somewhat forgettable because of how vague it gets. The gameplay is hit or miss depending on what you're looking for in a game. It also has nothing going for it besides the ability to have certain enemies as allies and some parts overusing nostalgia. The music has some fantastic moments and the game looks presentable. Frame rate is inconsistent, which is an odd choice. For me personally, I'll give it a 6.7 out of 10. If you're interested in what you see, then give it a shot, but there's probably better games out there that does the same thing. It's a short game to get through, and there are other modes once you're finished with the game if you have time for them. And the development team is now going to make a Kirby game that will try to do something risky and see if it will become successful. They're taking these play it safe ideas and are trying to make it into a 3D open sandbox with you capturing items and enemies and controlling them to solve puzzles just like Super Mario Odyssey.
It's a wonderful day to go out and play. Hey, maybe you could come along. All you need to bring is a song to sing, a happy little baby song.